This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, we're gathering here for a Friday podcast of some description. Making it sound like we're gathering for a funeral. I severely underestimated the lack of recording time I would actually get this week. I was so pumped too. Had a weekend to get all my ducks in a row and watch all the classic shows in succession. Then I sat down on Sunday night, I'm like, wait a minute. My Wednesday's booked. Thursday's going to be hectic as it is. When am I supposed to sit down to record any of this stuff? Well, it's currently 6:30 on a Sunday night. I'm going to be recording the WCW portion of the review here since I won't have time to do it on any other day. I guess I could do it tomorrow, but I like to splice the different segments up into 3 days. It's usually how I do it. Works best for me, works best for my voice. I don't have a radio voice. I've tried. It's a deep voice, but it's not sustainable. And like I said, Thursday's my editing evening. So I basically have to cram in all of this from now until Tuesday. Logistical nightmares. Gotta love them. Hope everyone's doing well, though. It's the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. The wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. Here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays. At least that's what I'm attempting to do. No promises during the fall season. The pandemonium has set in. The unpredictability of my schedule is really doing a number on me. And this channel for that matter. But since we're here, make sure you all subscribe, comment, and give the show a like. Again, make sure you check us out on either YouTube or Rumble every week. Bringing you a wide range of classic wrestling talk here and trying to stay consistent with it. It's not easy. I think that's all I got for the intros. Did I talk about the microphone situation on Monday? I think I did. Oh yeah, that's right. I just did the Raw review earlier. Yeah, still working on it. I'm in the process of opening the link that is 10 steps more than where I was about a year ago. Actually, I think I just looked at Sweetwater. Apparently, it is not currently in stock. It says available soon. Order today to reserve yours now and we'll ship it as soon as it's available. Estimated September 2025. It is almost October. I think they need to update their website. Question is, can I find it cheaper on Amazon? It's $100 on Sweetwater. Might need to do a little more research. Anyway, what do you say we dive into the classic reviews? Now that I've wasted everybody's time here. Lord knows I'm good at doing that. So what's been happening in the world of WCW? It's been a couple weeks since the Fall Brawl Clash event. Last we left things, we had a couple unresolved issues. For one, we're still trying to figure out what happened in that Freebird Steiners tag match, whether Robin Green intentionally tripped up Scott or not. It was not clear based on the video we saw, but we had our suspicions. And of course, there was also the whole plastic bag incident with the main event, which is unfortunately what that tag match is most remembered for. Not that it was a great tag match or one of the rare highlights in the year 1989 overall. It was all about the backlash the company got for generating the wrong kind of heat. And of course, the way Turner Broadcast handled the situation was by basically sending out a memo to all the boys saying, yeah, we can't have gratuitous violence on our wrestling shows anymore. Despite that the whole objective of pro wrestling is to create a worked business all centered around gratuitous violence. But what would these numbnuts know? Would you expect anything less from a bunch of corporate suits that didn't know shit from apple butter about wrestling? Now, before we break down some of the fallout from last week's episode, how's this for an opening TV bout on the Superstation? It is the Nature Boy Ric Flair getting down and dirty with Gene Ligon. I would have to go back in the time machine to remember the last time I saw Ric Flair work a match on the syndicated program. It's been months. Probably before they let the old studio on Techwood Drive for Center Stage in Atlanta. I wish the video feed wasn't so choppy. Whoever recorded this thing on their VCR had some really bad technical issues getting the tape to work properly. Yeah, figures. The one time I actually get to review a Ric Flair match on TV, and the tape starts bugging out like crazy. I mean, it was a pretty simple enhancement squash. Kind of an atypical Ric Flair match where he's the one controlling the pace of everything. I mean, most Flair matches, he's the one doing all the bumping and selling for 90% of it. But here he just took Gene Ligon to school, worked him over for a while, and slapped on a figure four for the submission. I guess you could say he tore up his ligaments. Yeah, I know, that was awful. I deserve that. By the way, Ric Flair seemed to be perfectly fine after having nearly been suffocated with a bag a couple weeks ago. I can't say for sure that they were intending to keep Flair off TV longer as a result of that angle, but because of the way things transpired, it's probably a conscious decision on their part to say, let's pretend that never happened and move on. I wish we could have pretended this Lex Luger promo never happened. There are those occasional Luger promos where he can really be on his game and deliver some great stuff. This was not one of those promos. This was a going through the motions Lex Luger promo. I mean, the basic premise to everything here was that Luger laid down an open challenge to anybody that's brave enough to face him for the U.S. heavyweight title. But his claim is that everybody's more scared of facing Luger than they are actually wanting to hold the belt. And until somebody actually has the balls to step up and accept the challenge, well, Luger basically has the authority to call the entire babyface roster a bunch of cowards. That was his conclusion. Can't necessarily say he's wrong. I know he's a heel, but if you got a collection of babyfaces who aren't willing to step up to the plate to answer Luger's challenge, doesn't that kind of validate his point? From there, we went back to the ring for Tim Parker versus Animal. I cannot attest to the whereabouts of Hawk this week, but he was nowhere to be seen on this episode. I don't know if he was hurt. I don't know if he missed a flight, if he was sick. I know a lot of the boys were having mental breakdowns around this time, so I also can't admit the possibility of him just saying fuck it and no showing the event. Or taping, not event. I mean, I have to assume it wasn't injury related because they were heavily pushing the Road Warriors Skyscrapers program here. Yeah, there's a match made in heaven. A feud that only Vince McMahon would fall in love with. 4 muscle-bound meatheads going at it in a tag team setting. Who wouldn't want to see that giant clash of styles? I mean, we all know what happened the last time Hawk and Animal were paired to work with 2 guys their size. The end result was not great. Anyway, well, Animal killed this geek in about a minute. They needed a follow-up promo on the Skyscrapers, basically saying that their biggest downfall is the fact that they have Teddy Long as a manager. And you know, he actually brought up a really good point here that I didn't even think about. He said that Teddy was the reason the Road Warriors got fucked out of the tag straps months ago. I completely forgot about that. I even remember when they showed the tape of Teddy turning heel and sabotaging the Road Warriors. Never even thought about that until he mentioned it here. Probably because it was not followed up on. Now, does it mean I'm stoked at the idea of having to watch the Road Warriors versus the Skyscrapers? Not at all. And if you need some kind of rationale to explain that, wait until we have to review the Dan Spivey match in a minute. So then we had a Gordon Solie pre-tape where he was following up on a press conference held earlier in the day by NWA management. Terry Funk was suspended in storyline over the bag angle from the clash. He was also fined $100,000. However, Flair called the press meeting so that he could lobby to get Funk unsuspended. Mainly so he can book him in a match and kick his ass. Or at least, that's hypothetically why. And so, Flair paid off the fine himself in order to get the match officially sanctioned for later on in October. Now, the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view match is going to be Sting and Flair against Funk and Muta, and what they're billing as a Thunderdome cage match. A gimmick match that we'll be detailing more as we get closer to the event. It's quite the doozy, if you know anything about that fiasco of a cage match. However, they're also advertising a match for the Omni. It's actually a month before the televised I Quit match between Funk and Flair at the Clash in November. They're actually giving it away at a house show a month beforehand. Kind of weird. I was still caught up in hearing about the electrified cage gimmick. One of those ideas that might have looked good on paper, but boy, did the execution fall flatter than a plate full of piss. I don't want to belabor the point, so I'll just say this and move on. Do y'all remember when TNA tried to do the electrified cage match on pay-per-view? Picture that, only slightly less rinky-dink. One was operated by a multi-million-dollar company with a decent production and financial backing. The other was overseen by Dixie Carter. So then we had the worst thing I've ever seen. Well, not exactly the worst thing I've ever seen, but it sure as hell wasn't good. It was the worst thing on this show, that's for sure. Poor Dick Murdoch. He had to go out there this week and work with Dan Two Left-Footed Spivey. It was the worst match of Murdoch's career. By that same token, it was arguably the best match of Dan Spivey's career. That's how horrible he was. I honestly don't even know what to say that already hasn't been beaten to death when it comes to anything Dan Spivey related. Every time I watch him work, I'm reminded of why the phrase, "don't quit your day job," actually has value. Spivey could have done anything. Accounting, welding, woodworking, general manager of your local Walmart. He chose professional wrestling. He looked at himself in the mirror one day and said, "I did okay at football. I'm an athlete. I can do wrestling. How hard could it possibly be?" He has to be among the top 10 worst wrestlers of all time, right? From an objective standpoint, okay, take away all the biases that come when people try to say somebody like a Hogan or an Ultimate Warrior are among the top 10 worst wrestlers of all time. I hated the Ultimate Warrior gimmick. I also didn't particularly like the person behind the gimmick because he was a human scumbag and a piece of shit. But at least Warrior drew fucking money at one point. He was, by all accounts, the #1 box office attraction for Vince in the late 80s. Somebody like a Dan Spivey, from an all-around perspective, when you take into account drawing ability, wrestling ability, personality, look, promo ability, pretty much anything that constitutes the foundation of what a pro wrestler should be, Dan Spivey was horrible in all departments. He didn't draw. He couldn't work. He had zero personality or charisma to be spoken of. Nobody cared about him as a fan. He looked like a wet sandbag with arms and legs. Putting a live mic in front of him was a death sentence. He was just an objectively all-around terrible professional wrestler. And that's why I have no qualms with categorizing him in the all-time worst pro wrestlers. Now, you can debate me on where he stands in those rankings, but if Spivey is not in your top 10 of all-time bad pro wrestlers, you need to reevaluate your list. So then we had a Brian Pillman promo. By the way, if you care to know, Sid ran in for the DQ in that previous match. It was the only redeeming part of it. So Pillman here talked about Luger's self-aggrandizing promo from earlier, so that he's somebody that's willing to answer the open challenge. Luger said he's welcoming all comers, old and young. Pillman is looking to seize the opportunity while it's there because he wants to capture NWA gold just like everybody else. Pretty cut and dry babyface promo. So now we look to see how Luger tries to weasel his way out of that one, claiming that Pillman's too green and hasn't done enough to prove himself as a worthy challenger yet. Now you can call that one in your sleep. Ah, fuck. have to talk about this next. Legitimately, the actual worst thing on the program. It's Tommy Angel and Rick Ryder versus the Dynamic Dudes, with Jim Cornette now serving as their advisor, not manager. He's not that crazy. Corny still has standards, even in 1989 when the bar wasn't set that high to begin with. Dude. Was Rick Ryder on drugs during this match? He was so out to lunch in this segment. Horrendous. He's in there doing spots with Shane Douglas. This guy could not get anything right. Shane's out there trying to call simple shit like one tackle drop down. Ryder looked like he didn't even know how to execute a simple headlock. Thank God he wasn't a big dude, so Shane and Johnny could pretty much manhandle him and get him to where they needed to be to hit their double team spots. Meanwhile, Tommy Angel, who we've actually seen work plenty on the Superstation, he wasn't good, but he was better than Rick Ryder. He's the one that had to stand on the apron like a dork the entire time. Terrible squash. The dudes hit their wipeout finish on Ryder and got the pin. I have nothing else to say other than Rick Ryder is fucking horrible. Worse than Dan Spivey? Probably. Might be a toss-up. Jury's still out. Anyway, let's actually talk about something worthwhile. Nancy's boobies. Her heel promo. Slip of the tongue. Now, going back to the conversation about fallout from last week, since we missed last week, we did not get a chance to talk about the big angle they shot where the Steiners got jumped by Robin's new mystery tag team. We did, however, learn that Robin lied about her whole identity. And what we did see at the Clash was not in fact coincidence. It was all part of her master plan. She made it clear in her pre-tape here that she is not Robin Green. Her name is Woman. She used the Steiners as a ploy because she saw right through Rick's weakness. His biggest weakness being his heart. She exploited that, as we all saw. She said that behind every great man is an equally powerful and great woman. But Nancy doesn't cling to any man. She's one of them independent whammon tropes you hear feminists cram down everybody's throat. Only difference is Nancy was actually hot and didn't have blue hair and a jillion tattoos. And or nose piercings. Her name is Woman. She does what she wants when she wants. And when her boys arrive in the NWA, they're going to wreak havoc over all the tag teams. But for now, the only thing the Steiners need to worry about is dealing with Woman. She's coming. And so am I. Wow. Fucking great promo, dude. God, Nancy was so awesome. So good. She knew how to work that bitchy, manipulative mind game gimmick to perfection. Guess it all wasn't kayfabe, as we came to find out when you look at how things went down with her, Sullivan, and Benoit. But I don't want to open that can of worms right now. So then we had a Midnight Express promo. Now we're seeing how things are cooking in the Midnight Dynamic Dude story that they're brewing. Cornette talked about how he originally wanted to have the Midnights challenge the Freebirds for the World Tag Belts at Halloween Havoc, but the Birds found a way to weasel out of that title defense. Since Cornette doesn't have the leverage to force the NWA's hand by booking the match anyway, he did manage to coerce the Freebirds into defending the straps against Cornette's other tag team that he's now agenting, the Dynamic Dudes. And of course, you're hearing Corny put over the Dudes while he's standing right next to Bobby and Stan, claiming that the Dudes could wind up leaving as the new tag team champs if the Birds underestimate them. And you're just kind of sensing that Bobby and Stan aren't really happy hearing any of this. So you're supposed to think that there's a little bit of jealousy going on here. And JR even went as far as to ask Stan what he thinks of the Dynamic Dudes. But then he and Bobby just blow him off and leave. It is a cool little story they're doing. And if you're watching it for the first time, not knowing how it plays out in the end, you're sitting there thinking, man, they might actually be doing a breakup with the Midnight Express. Which in 1989 seemed improbable. I even remember watching this for the first time and being really uneasy about the idea of Cornette turning on Bobby and Stan to join the Dudes. Mostly because I was a huge Midnight Express fan and thought it was ludicrous to imagine they'd be stupid enough to have Cornette leave the Midnights for the fucking Dynamic Dudes of all people. Like anybody wanted to see that. Glad to know it was a ruse. Spoiler. We had Flying Brian taking on the Cruel Connection. Didn't really write much down about this one. Brian hit some flashy offense and ended up winning with a springboard lariat. He actually kind of overshot the clothesline on Cruel Connection, but it still looked all right. There was a funny comment from JR when Brian went to hit Cruel Connection with a standing dropkick on the top turnbuckle. He claimed that Brian was at least 7 feet in the air for the dropkick. I can assure you, having watched the footage, he was nowhere near 7 feet in the air. Sorry to be a buzzkill. That'll probably be Luger's excuse for not wanting to defend the belt against him. You didn't get 7 feet in the air. Call me when you've improved your leaping ability, kid. And then we had a great pre-tape promo from the Steiner brothers. This was... Actually, you know what this was? It was perfect cornball wrestling that you could still take seriously. Mainly because the two guys delivering the material could believably beat the ever-loving shit out of you if they really wanted to. Now again, just to recap. Last week, Woman and her new tag team jumped the Steiners and really did a number on poor Scotty. So Scotty's out there all bandaged up. He's got sunglasses to cover up his swollen left eye. He's got cracked ribs. I mean, they really beat the shit out of him. Now, Scotty knew that Woman was no good from the start. He knew that she never had good intentions. And now Rick feels bad because not only did he not trust his brother, but now he has to deal with the fact that Woman betrayed him and tried to tag his brother instead of him. But the Steiners aren't the kind of team to stay down from a beating. Cracked ribs, swollen eye. None of that matters. Nobody else knows how to beat ass better than the Steiners. All that beating did is give the Steiners fuel to come back and get their revenge. And nobody does revenge better than Rick and Scott. I can't do the promo justice, obviously. It's one of those deals where you have to go listen to understand how great it was.
What you did to me was deep down inside, because I've never let down the Steiner name, and I've never let down my brother. So boys, show your face. Let us know who you are, because revenge will be ours. Revenge! Nobody does it worse than us. Brutality! Nobody does it better than us. And remember, nobody knows how to hurt another human being in so many different ways than the Steiner brothers. You should have killed him. You should have killed him. Why didn't you? You should have killed him. It ain't gonna hurt. Look at this. You think this is gonna stop it? This ain't nothing. We're gonna come in. We're gonna draw blood. You think this is stopping us? No way. No way it's gonna stop me. No way it's gonna stop him. Come on.
That's why the Steiners are among the all-time greats, man. Nobody cuts rambling, crazy, off-the-wall, batshit promos better than Rick and Scott. I mean, the Road Warriors were good at the crazy, rambling promos too. But the Steiners had a type of delivery that just made you believe every word they said. Despite how petrified Scott was when it came to public speaking around this time. Even pre-Big Papa Pump Scotty, he could still cut an intimidating promo. And then we had the Steiners come out to dismantle Joe Cruz and Bob Cook in the closing minutes. Missy was sporting her all-black funeral attire here, which is a great omen for the beating these jobbers were about to take. I knew it was all downhill from them the minute Cruz fucked up taking a knee lift from Scotty. He completely missed Scott's knee by 1.5 miles, proceeded to take a bump anyway, because he's an idiot. Scott responded by picking him up, taking his head clean off with a clothesline. Just knocked it right into the second row. I laughed. An absolutely beautiful mugging. Watching Cruz and Cook desperately try to tag out as if to say, I've had enough. It's your turn to get beaten up for a while. Glorious to watch. They did a really nice makeup job with Scott's left eye. A lot of detail and attention went into making that look legit. You know, the fact that they actually took pride in this kind of stuff back in the day says a lot. Trying to make worked injuries actually look realistic. Instead of what they do nowadays, where they just put some fake bandage tape around somebody's ribs and say, look, he's hurt. Can't you see? Yeah, sure, he's still doing 450 splashes through tables, but he's injured. Kayfabe. Get the fuck out of here. No wonder nobody believes in wrestling anymore. So Rick got the pin on Cruz with a belly-to-belly. Then Scott came in and shit-canned the other job guy for good measure. All business. Rick and Scott were not here to fuck around this week. And that was it. Only an hour show. It's hard for me to call the show bad. It was hardly eventful. But we had a handful of good things to talk about. Most of them in the pre-tapes. The ring action was lame as fuck. You can definitely see the quality improving here in the fall of '89, though. The shows are far from perfect, but the booking is so much more on track than it was over the previous 8 or so months. It actually looks like competent people are putting the show together instead of a bunch of clueless hacks that think they know more than they do. Cough, cough, Jim Herd. So that's good. I'll take what we're getting now over dog crap like the Ding Dongs and Norman the Lunatic and you name the rotten gimmick. The dance-breaking strongbow kid that flopped like a bad habit. God, that shit was just awful. It's good to see them taking a detour from the WWF carbon copy model and trying to get back to some sense of what WCW used to be before the new regime took over and screwed it all up. Alright, so moving on with the Midsouth portion of the review. We finally got a ruling on the situation involving the Midnight Express and their heinous attack on the Fantastics from 3 weeks back. Or as the district attorney from My Cousin Vinny would say, good old Jim Trotter, hyenas. It's amazing when you look back and see how things progressed in the Mid-South timeline. Even when you miss a show here and there. Imagine that. You're still kept up to date about all the previous stuff that happened in the last 3 or 4 weeks. That is what we call good logical booking. Here's what we learned when it came to Jim Cornette's punishment for what he and the Midnights did during that contract signing. After Jim had met with the Mid-South Board of Directors, after he tried to inflict lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit to avoid being fined for his actions, after he tried to jump through all these loopholes for him and his team, it was ruled that JC is being fined $30,000, the largest fine in Mid-South history. $10,000 for all 3 members of the Midnights, including Cornette. The Mid-South team threw out all the lawsuits and determined that the Midnights were accountable for all their actions. Now, while that did signify good news for the babyface side of the equation, JC had some comments to make about the situation from earlier in the day, because he knew he wanted to get the last laugh. And now Cornette's got an ultimatum for not just Bill Watts, but Mid-South as a whole. Since he knows that Watts pushed his agenda to the Mid-South Board of Directors to levy that fine on the Midnights, Cornette is going to hit Mid-South where it hurts the most. The pocketbook. He's giving Watts 2 weeks to overturn the $30,000 fine and give Cornette his check back. Elsewise, the Midnights are going to leave Mid-South with the tag belts, hold them hostage, and make sure the titles are never defended in the Mid-South area again. And then what is Mr. Watts going to do? What is he going to do without the Mid-South Tag Team Championships on television? To which I simply listened to that and rationally responded with probably the same thought that the cowboy had when he heard the comment. I'm just going to strip you fuckers of the belts and fire your asses. Now, I'm being facetious in a way. But even reasonably speaking, when Cornette's out there talking about leaving Mid-South with the titles, he does realize that Watts can just take the belts off of them, right? And if Bobby and Dennis decide not to give the original belts back, it's not like they can't just create a whole new set of tag belts. This has been done many times throughout wrestling history. Hell, they literally just redid it with the North American title in the last few months. I'm not exactly sure what Cornette's game plan is here. Threatening to leave the territory with the titles if Watts doesn't give his $30,000 check back? How did he even get possession of the check? Did Watts just withhold money from his account? I'm not exactly sure how this works. But I'll tell you what, if I'm Bill Watts, I'd be elated at the idea of the Midnights threatening to walk out of the territory. Titles or no titles. I know championships actually used to have a bit of meaning back in the day, before Russo came out and publicly called them pieces of leather. But all seriousness, I mean, what would be the issue with taking the straps off of them and just being like, well, folks, since our Mid-South tag belts were stolen, we had to go out of our way to create a new set of belts. So whenever you hear Cornette claim that the Midnight Express are the real Mid-South Tag Team Champions, don't listen to him, because he's lying. I know I'm reading way too much into such a minute, trivial detail, but it's the smart fan of me talking. The one that has to nitpick every fine detail. So then we went to the ring for Steve Brinson versus Hacksaw Duggan. I love Duggan's graphic t-shirt with a cartoon picture of Cornette on it that read, "I ain't afraid of no whip." I also liked how the image had a giant red slash through it. Now, one thing they touched on here was the third additional camera they added to the production. So now we have 2 hard cams and a floor cam perspective, which is neat. Kind of gives you the house show view when they play the footage from all the live events. It was weird though, because Watts was trying to give the impression that the cameras were actually inside the ring filming the action. But there wasn't a cameraman physically standing on the ring apron or anything. It was just the perspective of where the camera was, because he was pretty much zoomed in all the way. Overall, pretty formulaic Duggan squash. Got a little physical there when Brinson went to paintbrush Duggan during a lockup attempt. Then Duggan fired back and beat the crap out of him before hitting the spear and getting the 3. I always laugh when the job guys try to stir up shit with the bigger stars. Then they immediately get their asses kicked. Makes the matches more enjoyable. Tell you that much. From there, we had footage from last week's taping block where Butch Reed had called out Master G and threatened to tar and feather him. It was funny because they had already cluttered the ring with feathers before the match even began. I don't know where they came from. Maybe Reed did a promo or something beforehand and pulled out some feathers from a bag. There was a bag at ringside, so that's probably what it was. But you just see all these little particles flying through the air as Reed and Master G are taking bumps. And, well, here's basically what went down. Buddy Landau runs in for the blatant DQ. And as the heels try to restrain and go after Master G, Reed ends up missing a flying shoulder block and taking out Buddy by mistake, which leads to Reed getting tossed out to the floor and run into the guardrail. And then as Buddy's laying flat on his back in the ring, Master G takes the bottle of syrup, or whatever the sticky gimmick was, and he dumps it on Buddy's body so he can tar and feather him. It was a little hairy watching as he's gently rubbing this crap all over Buddy's stomach and crotch region. I mean, he was very close to giving him a handy a couple times there. Not that there's anything wrong with 2 dudes giving each other the business, just, well, there were cameras. It's a family show, after all. I also liked how the babyfaces that came down to ringside didn't even have to hold back Reed from trying to save Buddy. I mean, Reed just walked past the whole thing and left to go to the back. As if to say, nah, it's not me. I don't give a fuck. We all know he's my lackey anyway. You know, we talked about the Master G thing a couple weeks ago when he debuted. Again, I don't even remember him lasting through the end of the year before he went to go back to the WWF. He's just another one of these new black baby faces that Watts was desperately trying to plug into that JYD spot. And you know, for everything we said about Brickhouse Brown getting the same treatment, at least Brickhouse had charisma. The only thing Master G had was the gift of genetics. Star power aspect, that was severely lacking. But coming out of that, we got Buddy Landel versus Rocky Smith, aka Rocky King. Sort of an opportunity to get some heat back on Buddy after he was dressed like a chicken on television last week. Not a whole lot to say. Rocky was really bad in this match. Crazy to think he wound up being one of the better enhancement guys on Crockett Television in about a year or two. I mean, you watch him here, you'd have thought he never stepped foot in a ring before. Part of that might have been Buddy trying to work a stiffer style than normal. But they had some rough sequences here in the early goings. Just could not get on the same page. Buddy won with an elbow drop in like 2 minutes. Then we had the Midnight Express taking on Master G and Brickhouse Brown in a non-title match. I almost said non-sanctioned. Cornette would have wished. I personally wish this entire segment could have been Bobby Eaton versus Brickhouse in a 20-minute exhibition. They had some great spots together in the opening few minutes. Some of the most fun wrestling I've seen on a Mid-South show in a long time. I don't even know how they called this, but there was an awesome spot where Bobby and Brickhouse are doing a test of strength lockup. Somehow Brickhouse used Bobby's right knee to kind of spring off of him and give him an arm drag takeover. It was so beautifully executed, and dude, I'm telling you, I don't think they could have done that spot again if they tried it 100 times. It was flawless. And you know, it's not to say Master G was bad or anything here. I mean, he actually had a nice head scissors takeover on Dennis at one point. But the work between Bobby and Brickhouse Brown was phenomenal. I know. Undetected information. Write this one down. Bobby Eaton, fucking great professional wrestler. So the babyfaces are controlling the pace of everything in the early goings. Bobby and Dennis are just being whipping boys for these two. They eventually managed to cut off Brickhouse for a bit and work him over so they could build to the big chaotic sequence where Corny pulls down the rope so Brickhouse takes a bump out to the floor. Meanwhile, Master G's in there trying to fight off the Midnights by himself. And that's when you eventually get the whole army of heels hitting the ring for the disqualification. You got Butch Reed, Buddy Landel, Ernie Ladd. God. Poor Ernie looking like a hurting unit out there. In addition to looking slow and lethargic, he was also wearing a generic polo and khakis. I mean, he literally looked like he just got off the retirement golf tour. Not a good look for Ernie, especially considering his physical health in 1984. This did not help to make him look youthful. But they eventually pinned down Master G long enough so Buddy could go in there and whip him with a leather belt. But of course, you know, they're simultaneously trying to get over Master G like God. So, before the heels get the heat on him, Master G has to make a 5-on-1 comeback by himself and then make the heels fight to regain the advantage. I'm like, is that absolutely necessary? It is 5-on-1. Nobody's going to fault Master G for getting his ass kicked in this situation. He's not a superhero. And like I said, Buddy was the one that got to strap him at the end. How ironic. The one white guy surrounded by a bunch of black dudes. Yeah, that surely got him some heat in the South. It was a good heat segment. Of course, the babyfaces ran out a day too late to make the save. It's funny how they all came out together, too. It's like they were all watching this beatdown backstage for a solid minute and a half, and they're like, yeah, you know, we should probably go out there and give him a hand. Yeah, again, you obviously see them working to try to get over Master G as the top babyface. For what it's worth, it's not a complete flop. But it just goes back to all those comparisons we've been making with the dog. I mean, Master G was in much better physical shape than 1984 JYD. But there was no way that they could force him over as the next top babyface in the region. I don't even think the Midsouth fans were going to accept that. Dog was just a whole different kind of star. I mean, he had a drawing power that was unmatched with anybody else. It was a connection with the people. No matter how hard Watts tried to replace him. Oh, I'm just retreading the same ground when it came to talking about Brick House. Old talking points. So I actually wrote this down. In theory, the joke sounded a lot better in my head. I'm not going to say precisely what I wrote, but it was a comment about Bill Watts going through his cross-dressing stage. Meaning that they came back from break and Adrian Street was in Watts' commentary position. And to be fair, he was wearing a skin-tight red bodysuit with a hair ribbon. I know it's a touchy subject. Don't want to offend. Even though I couldn't give a shit less what people think. If you can't take a lighthearted joke about cross-dressers, get over it yourself. Now you may be asking, why was Adrian doing commentary for this next match? Well, for one, he's wrestling Terry Taylor next week in what winds up being an iconic Mid-South segment. This is also a direct quote from Adrian, so you can't give me shit for this one. He said that he can't wait to get his hands on Terry next week. His words, not mine. So fuck off. Anyway, the match is Terry Taylor versus Jason Walker. And the entire time Taylor's in there working over his opponent, Adrian's making provocative comment after provocative comment. Suggestive comments about how Terry would never be able to get him in certain positions on the ring mat. And, well, it was Adrian. What can you say? The only man I knew that can make homoerotic comments about wrestling another man, but still be able to believably kick the shit out of just about anybody. Probably except his wife. That actually might be the life lesson for all the effeminate men in the world today. You can wear a dress in public if you want to. If high heels are your thing, Godspeed. But you should also be able to stretch a motherfucker if he tries to jump you in an alleyway. Now that's badass. Being able to take somebody down in high heels. Whew. Mad respect. Up next, we had Hercules Hernandez and Dr. Death versus Sonny King and Magnum TA. Oh yeah, Magnum TA is officially back. After a month-long hiatus of completely disappearing from Midsouth programming, the North American champion, at least I presume he's still the champion, I don't even know at this point. He was still by far the best worker out of anybody in the match. It was a toss-up between him and Hercules. Sonny King was his usual botchy self. In the span of the first 5 minutes he was in there, he managed to fuck up multiple shoot-off attempts. He gave Dr. Death the worst back body drop I've ever seen. Every time you watch him hit the ropes, it looks like week 1 in training school. He gave Magnum a cold tag at one point to kind of set up the heat sequence at the end, where after they did the false tag to Sonny, Magnum goes to roll up Hercules in the ropes, but then Dr. Death comes in and whiffs Magnum in the back of the head with his football helmet. And by whiff, I mean he swung for the fences and completely missed Magnum's head, to the point where Magnum couldn't even register anything because nothing actually made contact with him. So upon realizing that Dr. Death fucked up, he just hit him with the helmet a second time. And then Hercules got on top and got the pin. I wrote, sloppy, muddled, and very hard to sit through at times. But it still got the job done. And then we had Bill Dundee making his on-screen debut for Midsouth in a match with Rick McCord. This is where all the marks started giving Dundee shit for booking himself on TV when he was also the primary booker for Midsouth during this time. Well, in this case, because I know that Dundee wasn't out there to book himself on top and put the fucking world title on himself, I never had an issue with Dundee working matches on Mid-South and also being the head booker. Plus, it also helped that Dundee was a super talented worker and actually knew what the hell he was doing. It wasn't a Dusty Rhodes situation, let's just say that. For all of Dusty's great attributes, and he had many, he was not faultless when it came to the way he positioned himself on the card in Crockett. And Dundee beating a local job guy in 2 minutes, it wasn't going to imply the downturn of the business or anything. Fine action for what it was. I did find it strange how long the ref waited to call for the bell when Dundee had McCord down in a sleeper hold. I mean, Dundee's laying on the mat for like 30 to 45 seconds with McCord clearly unconscious in the sleeper. And the ref's just taking his good old time, shaking his arm, letting it drop several times, waving his hand in front of him like, "You okay there, sir? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?" Well, I guess he's dead. Yeah, he was dead for about 35 seconds prior, dude. I'm sure Dundee was sitting there like, what are you waiting for? Just call for the fucking bell. Again, I understand the reputation that comes with promoters allowing the booker to put himself on TV and go over talent. I mean, if anybody thought superstar Bill Dundee was somebody to worry about in 1984, like he was going to book himself to go over guys like Hacksaw Jim Duggan or the Midnight Express or any other major top name in the territory, let's not go crazy. Now, Dundee had a purpose for booking and wrestling at the same time. Keep in mind, he still had the answer to Watts. You know, I really don't know how I would define this episode. I use the term buffer show a lot to indicate an episode that really didn't do much to move the needle outside a couple small little story details. Kevin Sullivan, I think, used to coin those maintenance shows. I mean, there wasn't really a big angle that moved things forward like we saw with that Fantastics Midnight's contract signing a few weeks back. I mean, the only big thing that happened this week was seeing Master G get beaten up by a bunch of heels. But he is definitely somebody they're pushing heavily right now, whether you want to see it or not. You know, we kind of just need to trudge through this small dick syndrome period that Watts is going through now that JYD's out of the picture. You know, the problem is that once you analyze what's really going on, it's impossible not to see how flagrant the whole thing is. I mean, it's one thing to try to get over a new top babyface, but Watts' approach was so beyond preposterous. And I still think deep down he knew that he could never find a true JYD replacement. But it just took him a long time to figure it out. Lot of trial and error. So that brings us to World Class. And I think I briefly mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but for those that missed it, I am 100% putting these World Class reviews on hiatus after this year. We're going to see it through to the end of the year, but yeah, the schedule I'm dealing with now is not conducive to try to stay consistent with 3 different classic reviews right now. Maybe a few years ago I could have managed, but I'm just so booked these days, and to be honest with you, even when I do have time, like this weekend, for example, to actually sit down and watch all 3 shows, God, I'm so exhausted and mentally drained after it's all over. Just burns me out, you know? And the unpredictability of my weekend schedule makes things that much more difficult. And if I keep sticking with World Class reviews on top of doing Midsouth and WCW, because I still want to prioritize the other 2, you know, there could be times where I just don't have time to watch an episode of World Class. There'd be way too much inconsistency. And I don't want to do that, because then it's not a real retro review series. It's just sporadic recaps here and there. And it's not going to be fun for me, because if I miss a couple weeks, I'm not going to have any idea what's going on. And I'm not going to go out of my way to watch the shows that I did miss in my free time. So we're just going to do that. And trust me, we're already juggling a lot when it comes to doing the Retro Raw, the TBS Superstation reviews, and Mid-South. It might not seem like a lot, but once Raw goes to 2 hours, I mean, that's going to eat away even more time. Plus, I'm also not accounting for pay-per-view reviews. The journey was real, but unfortunately, World Class is going to be going away from our review series after December. So just keep that on your radar in the future. If anybody actually cares, I don't even know at this point. Probably not. So I'm going to blast through as much of this as I can. I mean, there's already so much that's happened when it comes to the landscape of the World Heavyweight title. It is official. Chris Adams was stripped of the belt. And here's how they found a new champion. In a completely random phantom title change off camera that nobody knew about, the new World Class Wrestling Association World Champion, Black Bart. And I know what you're all thinking. Excuse me, Black Bart? How the hell did that happen? Well, the answer is nobody fucking knows. In kayfabe, the answer was that Black Bart randomly showed up in World Class in 1986, knocked off Chris Adams in his first opportunity at the title, and then he won the belt. Now, in reality, I'm pretty sure he was simply awarded the belt because they had to scramble to find a new champion last minute. Not somebody on the roster that was already a proven commodity. No, that would be too simple. They had to bring in Black Bart from the Mid-Atlantic region, hotshot the belt on him from out of the blue, to literally just have him lose the strap about a month later to Kevin Von Erich. Talk about going around your elbow to get to your wrist. So that was one of the key stories coming out of this week's taping. In terms of the action at the Sportatorium, we had the Grappler and Spike Johnson versus Steve Simpson and Mark Youngblood. They also did a quick little sponsor for one of the local charity events in the Dallas area to target cystic fibrosis. A bowling event. Sounds like fun. They had a really cute family sitting at ringside with a mom and two boys to promote the charity event. Making sure to point out that the youngest one managed to generate the most revenue for donations. And who could say no to that? So I have no idea who Spike Johnson is. Never heard the name. Couldn't really find much about him on the internet aside from a few world-class tapings on YouTube, which were not helpful. So he must have been local. I did, however, get directed to a wiki page for Mabel, which was odd. I don't know how Spike Johnson managed to get Mabel's name to come up in the search algorithms. But there you go. As a cold prelim, it was a decent little match. The people are still behind Simpson, which is amazing considering the lack of attention they've given him since the fallout of the summer. But he is still over. Johnson was a big burly dude, so he worked a power game through most of this. Babyface was wound up double-teaming Johnson at the end before the four-way breakdown. Then the Grappler came in, missed a big elbow drop. Then Youngblood and Simpson comboed Grappler with a running splash dealia bob. Not entirely sure what you'd call it. Youngblood basically pressed Simpson into the air and kind of helped him come down with a splash onto Grappler. The Marks know all the names of every move in existence, so they'll be able to tell me. Then they'll ridicule me for not knowing it's called the Assisted Elevated Splash. It was used a total of 3 times in All Japan back in 1970 with Baba and Antonio Inoki. How dare I not know that? Y'all see why I don't engage with most of the wrestling community? Well, then we had a replay of something that transpired last week. What I guess we can officially coin the Dingo Warrior face turn. The real one this time. It is a 6-man tag with Warrior, Matt Bourne, and Buzz Sawyer versus all the Von Erichs. And it was during that match where Sawyer and Bourne turned on the Dingo Warrior and refused to tag in when he was getting worked over. So it cost them the match as a result. Why did they do this? It was never explained. So the Dingo Warrior responded here and did a promo saying that he's done a lot of things since coming to World Class. But the one thing he's never done is turn his back on a friend. He's been loyal to everybody he's associated with. And in only the way Jim Hellwig could botch his way through verbiage and talk in circles for essentially an hour, while they're showing Warrior beat up all the heels after the match, including Percy, they cut to an inset where he's talking about how he's going to do what he's always done and continue to do what he does best. Or something to that extent. He basically promised revenge on Bourne and Sawyer for what they did. So it is a babyface turn. They did not make mention of any previous dissociation from Gary Hart. All I can say about the promo was, it was the Ultimate Warrior speaking here, just slightly more coherent than a typical Ultimate Warrior promo. I mean, he wasn't mentioning anything about Destrucity or feeling the power of the Warriors in his veins. It was just Jim Hellwig doing a very cartoony babyface promo, which is actually an upgrade from the promos he would eventually cut as the Ultimate Warrior in the WWF. Because those promos sucked a dick. Then we came back for a very bizarre segment. It's Rick Rude standing in the ring with a new valet. And I vaguely recall them mentioning a woman coming to Dallas named Raven. But then I thought about it and I'm like, that was months ago. At the time, I could not find any information on a female valet named Raven. And upon seeing her here, I think I now see why I couldn't find anything on her. She was a very attractive young female with just about every generic trait you can associate with hot women in the 1980s. Not to say that's a negative thing, but I mean, there was nothing to script about her. She wasn't a Sunshine or a Missy Hyatt or even a Baby Doll for that matter. She was generic eye candy. Like the kind you would see on those retro Raws with Hunter Hearst Helmsley in 1996, where like every week it was just another new generic hot woman with no distinct personality. Just big-breasted and hourglass-shaped bodies. So that was the first thing to note here. The second thing was even more wild and random. Right as they're about to start the match, they cut to a completely random pre-tape with Pretty Boy Larry Sharp and The Crusher, where they proceed to do the most cornball sports entertainment version of a wrestling promo you've ever heard. Like, take that Ultimate Warrior promo that I was talking about a minute ago, dial that up to about 150. No joke, this would have fit perfectly on an episode of WWF Superstars in 1988. And before I say anything about the specifics of the promo, the Crusher, for those that didn't know, was Bam Bam Bigelow. Larry Sharp, I actually don't know how many people know about his career. I think most people recognize Sharp for being the co-founder of the Monster Factory Training School in New Jersey. I know AEW's plugged that school plenty of times over the last several years. I think QT Marshall was a big trainee down there. Some other guys I can't think of off the top of my head. Bam Bam was actually a trainee there. And Sharp was a legit amateur too, from what I remember. Didn't he rank like top 3 in the NCAA Nationals one year? In terms of his professional in-ring career, he did some work in Canada before he went to work for Vince Sr. in the mid-70s. I think he wrestled down in Puerto Rico for a bit. But he and a guy named Jack Evans were one of the more prominent tag teams for the WWF at one point. The original Hollywood Blondes. And no, it's not the Jack Evans you're probably thinking of. Not the indie goofball that teamed with that other generic spot monkey for the first few years of AEW's existence. But God, this promo is just insanely wild. Larry's here doing the most over-the-top heel promo you've ever heard. Talking about how serious he and the Crusher are when it comes to wrestling. Meanwhile, Bam Bam's standing there gnawing on an empty can of Diet Coke and doing the most ridiculous facial expressions to show off his missing front teeth. Of all times for anybody to talk about how seriously they're taking the sport of professional wrestling, this did not do it justice. Now, don't get me wrong, it was fun. I had a good laugh watching it. Wasn't exactly my cup of tea when it comes to my taste in wrestling promos. But they are coming to world class. So get ready. We might see Bam Bam bite the head off a live chicken. Anyway, back to the action at hand. It's I still can't believe he's around world-class Rick Rude versus Lance Von Erich. With Raven now acting as Rude's corner man. Or corner woman. Part of me is actually wondering here, had Rude stuck around Dallas longer, would Raven's career as a valet have actually lasted longer than 2 weeks? I mean, she wasn't bad, just, again, not the personality of a Sunshine, unfortunately. The work was alright, but it's a Lance match. You know what you're getting there. There was a long sequence where Rude and Lance were just kind of holding each other in a stationary bear hug for a while. I mean, Rude's down on the mat laying on top of Lance in this hold for seemingly a month. I'm growing increasingly bored. And Rude continued to work over Lance for the heat until he went up and missed a diving something. And Lance made a comeback, shot Rude into the ropes, hit a shitty super kick. At which point they both brawled out to the floor and proceeded to have a tug-of-war trunk pull exchange, which Lance eventually won by getting back in the ring to break the count. I'm not even kidding, that was the finish they came up with. It was, I'm going to pull you off the apron by your trunks, then you're going to pull me off the apron by my trunks. We'll do it again. And then finally, Lance just pulled Rude off and slid back into the ring to win by countout. Can y'all say wet popcorn fart? You know, at this rate, I'm content with never having to see another Lance Von Erich match as long as I live. The more I see of him, the less I want to see of him. He's the reverse psychology character of the Von Erich family. When you see Kevin in the ring, you're always wanting to see more of him. Mike, it's sort of a pity factor. Lance, dude, even the Dallas faithful at this point can't stand him. He is so exposed by this stage. Thankfully, 1987 was his final swan song. Didn't he retire not too long after that? I don't even remember. So we had Black Bart versus Brian Adias. First, I thought it was a TV main event. Then I realized we had one more segment after this. Could you imagine them actually booking this as a world-class TV main event? I know Bart's the champion, but Brian Adias in a main event singles match? I know the roster was thin in 1986, but come on. This is a spot that actually happened, and I am not halfway making this up. Brian Adias went to give Black Bart a head scissors takeover. He followed this up by looking at the camera, doing a pistol whip signal with his hand, and then he proceeded to teabag Bart's head while his legs were wrapped around him. That happened. He grinded on Bart's head, and he looked like he was having fun doing so. It was arguably the most notable thing that happened in the match. The rest of it was primarily Bart working over Adias while Bill Mercer made grunting noises anytime Adias got kick-stomped or punched. He mentioned at one point here that Bart came out to the ring last week on horseback, which apparently was the first time anybody ever rode out to the ring on a horse before. Didn't one of the Von Erichs come out to the ring on horseback at a stadium show? Or did I just dream that? Kind of odd to think Black Bart was the first wrestler to do something like that. As a heel, no less. Whatever. The most impressive spot was Black Bart coming out the top of the leg drop on Adias. That also wound up being the finish. It's still very strange to think that Black Bart showed up as a placeholder champion here in '86 just to lose the belt to Kevin in a month. I mean, I guess that's how they coined the phrase transitional champion. Not that Bart was a bad worker. You know, we obviously covered a little bit of his run in Crockett when he was there in '85 and some of '86. Good, solid talent. But not really somebody you'd buy as a top heel champion of a territory for how little it lasted. I don't even remember how long Black Bart stuck around Dallas. I mean, with the turnover rate of this roster, it's hard to keep track of anybody's status. Guys came and went so quickly. And by that same token, guys that I've never even heard of. And I like to consider myself a somewhat knowledgeable wrestling fan. But even I don't know every wrestler that ever graced a ring before. The main event was a good example of that. It's Buzz Sawyer and Matt Bourne versus the Mighty Zulu. And again, never heard this name before. No idea where he came from or what he did prior to showing up in Dallas. His name was Steve Dahl. And to say that he looked like every standard 1980s white guy with a mullet, that would be putting it mildly. Here's the crazy part, though. As I was doing my research while this 5-minute TV match was happening in the background, I actually came to learn that Steve Dahl is somebody we've actually covered on WWF television in the previous couple years. In addition to being one of the recurring jobbers, he was also one half of the well-renowned underneath tag team of Well Done. You all remember Well Done, right? Timothy Well and Steve Dunn. He was the Dunn of Well and Done. That is how quickly I managed to block out so much of the bad WWF program we've covered in the last 3 years. I made it a concerted effort to forget everything about the team of Well Done. I also came to learn that he ended up working in WCW during the Nitro era. Specifically, and this is a real deep piece of knowledge for all the ADD fanatics out there, the episode of Monday Nitro where Scott Hall made his debut, when he walked down through the crowd and interrupted a televised match, one of the two guys working during that segment was Steve Dahl. Bet you didn't know that. And now you do. There's so much wrestling history out there that you would think I would remember after having reviewed it. But then there are certain things where I see it happen and then completely forget it the minute it's over. Sometimes intentionally, other times not so much. Of course, now people are going to comment and say, how do you not remember Steve Dahl was part of Scott Hall's Nitro debut? Probably because it was a completely random cult TV match with two geeks that nobody gave a shit about. And the fact that Steve Dahl was marginal in the grand scheme of everything. His biggest claim to fame was being one half of Well Done. Do I need to say any more? So the match, like I said, Bourne and Sawyer went over after completely dismantling Dahl for about 5 minutes. Zulu, to my knowledge, never tagged in one time. Probably for the better. That is literally all I cared to note about it. I was too busy doing research on a guy that we've already talked about and completely forgot he ever existed. But what are you going to do? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the hell out of here and wrap up this podcast. Because I'm beat. So, just kind of thinking ahead here. This coming Monday, there should be a show. Unless I'm mistaken. And imagine that. Air conditioning unit's kicking back in. So that's a good time to call it quits. Perfect timing. I'm going to get out of here. Take care, all, and I'll catch you Monday. Peace out.